A safe place to call home can easily be taken for granted. But for so many individuals and families that Cornerstone serves, home is actually not safe, and access to affordable housing is a huge barrier to leaving, and they're also facing severe economic hardships. Victims and survivors must make the impossible choice of staying in an abusive relationship or becoming homeless. Imagine yourself having to decide whether to endure violence or move your kids out of their home to a cramped, temporary living situation with family or friends, or even your car. These decisions might even be made at a moment's notice, following a particularly dangerous or escalating act of violence, with no time to pack belongings, much less a toothbrush or pajamas. We know that 1 in 3 women who are homeless are actually homeless due to domestic violence. To address this challenge, Cornerstone provides several housing options that meet victims and survivors' needs, from emergency shelter to transitional housing, and we connect our participants to permanent long-term housing. We also incorporate critical economic empowerment services, such as financial literacy and asset-building components, that support survivors as they work to achieve long-term economic security. Our commitment to providing comprehensive housing options and providing services to support survivors as they become economically stabilized is not new. A safe place to call home has always been at the core of our work. From a safe, ADA-compliant emergency shelter, to our transitional housing program, to a partnership with low-income housing complexes, to a new program that assists survivors in finding market-rate housing. Our advocates are committed to providing comprehensive, trauma-informed services and can help with immediate crisis and with its lasting impact.
When an individual or family in need of a safe place to stay comes to Cornerstone, they are greeted by our advocates. Together, they work to assess the victim survivor's needs and help to make the transition to the new living space. We provide food, clothing, and toiletries as needed, and depending on the participants' short and long-term goals, we'll connect adults with other programs at Cornerstone or to external partners. We also help children with the transition and work to mitigate the impact of the violence they've experienced or witnessed. Our shelter is set up as apartments, each with 2 bedrooms with a bunk bed, a living room, a kitchen where residents can cook for themselves, and a bathroom. This creates a sense of normalcy. While it is not the home they fled from, our unique shelter setup feels a little bit more home-like during a crisis and allows for cultural considerations, as well as the ability to house adolescent sons with their mothers. Separate, welcoming, accessible, and trauma-free communal spaces for women, teens, and young kids give shelter residents a place to go outside their units. Male-identified adults receive safe and comfortable alternative housing in hotels while accessing Cornerstone's comprehensive services. We know how important it is that these spaces are welcoming, accessible, and trauma-free to promote self-care and minimize triggers. In our shelter, we've made several intentional decisions to meet these goals. For example, when a participant first enters the shelter space, they're greeted with a welcome sign in multiple languages. The artwork in the hallways and communal spaces reflects the diversity of the people we serve. The paint colors in our shelter are calming, furniture is placed facing the door, and private meeting spaces allow victim survivors to feel safe, sharing their story and their needs. It is critical that our spaces are ready for anyone who comes through our doors. Chairs and couches have been intentionally selected for seat height and armrests. Hardware on kitchen cupboards are inclusive, and we have a wheelchair-accessible unit with additional considerations and modifications. A partnership with Think Self, a nonprofit that specializes in deaf adult education and advocacy, has taught us about the needs of deaf and hard of hearing victim survivors. As a result, we have the appropriate tools, equipment, and resources available so that our shelter and services are accessible for the deaf community. Since our shelter first opened its doors at its current location over 15 years ago, it has been home to thousands of families. We are acutely aware of the continued need for life-saving housing for victims of domestic violence, sexual violence, and human trafficking.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Grimm, and I'm the coordinator for the SEAS program here at Cornerstone, which stands for Community and Economic Empowerment Services. As you can imagine, the transition out of shelter can be a very difficult time for survivors. Most often, these women cannot go back to where they were before they came to Cornerstone. There's a lack of affordable and safe housing available, many folks lack support from family and friends, and income is a major issue for the residents of our shelter. One option at Cornerstone that we are able to provide to residents of our shelter is our CORE Transitional Housing Program. CORE, which stands for Centered on Results Every Day, is a supportive housing program for survivors of domestic violence. Our buildings consist of 8 transitional housing units, 4 permanent housing units, and 1 home, which is also permanent housing. When our program is at capacity, it consists of 12 families and 1 individual with no kiddos. Our transitional housing has a maximum stay of 2 years. During that time, the residents need to meet regularly with their advocate, commit to taking our financial literacy course, and adhere to our policy of no drugs or alcohol on the property. Most of our units are filled by referrals from Cornerstone Shelter, but if our shelter does not have anyone interested and/or income eligible, then we reach out to the agency as a whole before connecting with community partners. While living in our units, our 2 core supportive housing advocates walk alongside these women as they work to create change and live a violence-free life. During regular one-to-one meetings, advocates assist with goal planning and safety planning. Our youth advocate's available to meet with the children and helps connect kiddos together at regularly planned group events. For many of these survivors, it's their first time living on their own, so having their advocate and a youth advocate available to provide support during this time is quite imperative. Our goal for CORE participants is that by the end of their time in our program, they can feel stable, secure, and confident in their future. They can trust their ability to take care of themselves and their family. Goals such as finding employment, going back to school, raising your credit score, getting your GED, purchasing a vehicle, opening a bank account, or going to therapy are goals that all of our participants are working towards. And I get to see these goals achieved by these incredibly resilient women every day. One of the most inspiring pieces of my job is watching our CORE residents move into their unit after a few months getting settled in, and then they start to dream about their future. It's the moment they realize that they can think of their future and what they want it to look like. The stability and support that CORE provides can truly change the trajectory of a family's future.
Because we know that economic factors play a critical role in domestic violence and present serious obstacles for survivors who wish to leave abusive partners, all of our participants, including those in our housing programs, have access to our economic empowerment services. Abusive partners often retain financial control over their partners and engage in tactics that negatively affect a survivor's ability to become economically independent, such as harassing her about money matters or sabotaging efforts to go to school or work. In addition, victims are commonly isolated from financial resources, and many lack the access to cash, checking accounts, and credit. Cornerstone's economic empowerment programming is focused on helping survivors achieve long-term safety and economic security. One of those components includes a 10-hour multi-week financial literacy class that covers topics like budgeting, credit, banking, and investing, with safety considerations woven throughout each session. Participants also have the opportunity to open an IDA, which is a matched savings account. It boosts their savings towards an asset like a car, home, or post-secondary education. Thanks to collaborations with local and national nonprofits and support from foundations and corporate partners, we're able to match their savings, which accelerates a life-changing purchase. One recent story shared by a Cornerstone advocate highlights the success of this program. After a time in our emergency shelter, Alicia was accepted into our transitional housing program, where she continued to work toward educational and financial goals. She attended our financial literacy workshops, and she worked with advocates one-on-one on financial planning. As a result, she's increased her credit score from 0 to 788 and opened an IDA, the Match Savings Account. As she approaches her transitional housing exit, she'll be the first-time homeowner as a result of this IDA. She is excited and hopeful, and we're confident in her future. 99% of victims of domestic violence experience financial abuse. It's often cited as the biggest barrier to leaving an abusive relationship. Cornerstone's economic empowerment programming works to reduce those barriers and assists victims and survivors in achieving their goals.
Hi, I am Lucy. I am the Rapid Rehousing Supervisor here at Cornerstone. So our Rapid Rehousing program is one of the newest programs at Cornerstone. We started in the summer of 2019. So Rapid Rehousing is a program that helps people who are homeless because of domestic violence get into housing. And we provide rental assistance and then also advocacy. The worlds of homelessness and then the worlds of domestic violence have long been separate. While in fact 1 in 4 women are homeless because of domestic violence. So we wanted to try to bridge the gap between the world of homelessness and the world of domestic violence, and then this program does that because that's kind of the specific population that we target. How do participants get connected to our program? So our program is run through the Hennepin County Coordinated Entry System. This is just a system that helps people who are experiencing homelessness get connected to housing programs. So if we have an opening in our Rapid Rehousing program, then we tell Hennepin County that we have a space, and then they look to their system to find either a single or a family who is experiencing homelessness because of DV. So then we get connected and we try to see if the program is a good fit, if they're eligible, and if they're interested in this program. If they say yes and they're eligible, then they get enrolled in our program, and that's when they begin working with an advocate. So the first step that the advocate and the family or single do together is address barriers. Like we said, they have experienced domestic violence, but they also have experienced homelessness. So there are a lot of things that we need to work on. Often that's like past debt. It could be trying to find income. It could be evictions, and these could all be, because of an abuser as well. So once they are housing ready, then that is when we find housing in the community together with the advocate. And once they're accepted, then they move in to this new housing, and we stick with them for 6 months. So we provide rental assistance and financial assistance with application fees, first month's rent, security deposit, and then rent for 6 months. And then the advocate sticks with them that whole time to keep them on their feet and connect them with landlords. So it is important just because this program really targets people who were previously missed by the homelessness system. It's also unique because we find housing in the community with just your normal private landlords, so finding housing how anybody else would. So this creates some challenges because landlords have strict requirements, and that can be hard, but it's good because it creates some good rental history for them. So there's a lot of different moving parts in this system and in this program, but I think a story that I want to tell will really help kind of bring some color to that. So one story that I think of was a participant that an advocate had worked with where a survivor was living with her abuser out of state, and she was able to flee. So she fled to the state of Minnesota and was staying with a friend, but her friend didn't want her to stay with her for very long, so she was soon going to be either on the streets or in shelter. So she called Day One, which is our 24-hour crisis line for the whole state of Minnesota, and then that Day One advocate thought it'd be a good idea to connect her to Cornerstone's community advocate, and then that Cornerstone community advocate introduced her to the coordinated entry system and said you should get connected with this system. And from there she was then matched with our program, with Cornerstone's Rapid Rehousing program, where she worked with an advocate and was able to get housed within 3 months, so very quickly. And then she was accepted by a landlord and is now still in that same household, in that same house, being stable with her kids.
Since 2013, Cornerstone staff have provided on-site services to residents of Blooming Glen and Ewing Square, two Section 8 townhome developments where residents pay 30% of their income towards rent. I am at Blooming Glen. That's a 50-unit townhome development in Bloomington. I'm there 12 hours a week, and that's in addition to my role as a supportive housing advocate through Cornerstone's transitional housing program. Another advocate from our transitional housing program is on site at Ewing Square, and that is a 24-unit development in Brooklyn Center, and she's there for 8 hours a week. We recognize that some of the residents at these locations might be at risk for housing instability. One unplanned expense, one unplanned medical bill come up of reduced work hours, losing a job, that can make it really difficult to maintain housing for low-income families. So our partnership with the management companies allows us to be there on site and to effectively and efficiently provide services to those households that might need that help. We know that domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and general crime are widespread, and whether or not families have disclosed trauma to us, we do recognize that some of the families we serve at Blooming Glen and Ewing Square could be survivors of intimate partner violence. Resident services are offered in many different ways. Some of the examples would be providing resources and referrals to community organizations in order to meet basic needs. That could be rental assistance, food support, clothing, county benefits. We offer one-on-one goal planning and support, application assistance, budgeting, financial literacy classes. Sometimes we can provide school supplies. Mainly, we are trying to help support the residents to become successful renters. We also offer two community building activities each year. One is National Night Out, which is the first Tuesday of every August, and the other is a holiday party. And we offer those on site to all the residents that live at those locations. Blooming Glen also has a community garden, and residents that live at Blooming Glen can sign up to take care of their own plot, and they get to grow their own food, which encourages healthy lifestyle. Each property has a small number of units set aside for families who meet the Minnesota definition of long-term homelessness and who have also experienced domestic violence. Families are referred to those units through the coordinated entry process. We understand that safe and affordable housing is oftentimes a huge barrier for those fleeing domestic violence. Our primary focus in assisting these households is providing residents with housing retention and community connections to much-needed resources. We strive hard to make a difference in the futures of these families. Our families in the LTH units many times receive more in-depth and individual advocacy than most residents, but their participation is not required. And all households at the property receive help from Cornerstone Resident Services, regardless if they've identified as being a survivor of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, or general crime. We love having the opportunity to provide support to anyone who may need it, and being at these properties allows us to extend our services to more of our communities.